Pirates. While the use of the term can conjure up many ideas, from the sea-roving plunderers of the 17th century Caribbean to men in speedboats with assault rifles, in the 1770s, especially along the coast of the newly formed United States of America, pirates were not only a very real and oftentimes dangerous force, but were also instrumental in many key engagements of the American War for Independence. From the outset of the War for Independence, much like many other early modern conflicts, many former merchant ships, and subsequently many of their crews, took to the practice of privateering, or, in essence, legalized piracy. Yet, as many of these mariners turned military men carried about their business, they carried with them not just their arms, but the very clothes upon their back as well. In fact, their clothes were one of their most distinguishing features. The sailor of the 1770s found himself dressed in a way that was often unique to his trade and was easily recognizable to many others. One could simply walk into any port, be it anywhere in the former colonies or even in Britain itself, and point out a sailor simply by his dress. The clothing of a sailor in this period was not only readily identifiable, but also transcended his service or even his allegiance. Sailors of the Royal Navy, those aboard merchant ships, or again, even the privateering vessels all found themselves in much the same clothes, and one could hardly call the dress of a sailor in this period uniform. It might even be better to say that this video in its own right is not solely a study of the clothing of American privateers, but of nearly all sailors in the Anglo-American world of the 1760s through to the 1780s. Starting from the innermost layers of the sailor's attire, shirts and stockings made up the base of not only his clothing, but of almost all of his European contemporaries. Much like I've discussed in my examination of the 4th Connecticut Regiment, shirts in the 1770s were made of linen or flannel and can be either in natural, white, or checked fabrics. Since these formed the backbone of men's clothing in this period, sailors often had multiple shirts. For instance, the Marine Society, a philanthropic organization dedicated to outfitting prospective men and boys for service in the Royal Navy, stipulated in its 1772 regulations that the boys were to receive, quote, 1 check shirt, 2 ditto, meaning the same. Stockings were another important facet of sailors' clothing. Stockings, also occasionally referred to as hose, were usually made from wool, and much like shirts, were seen as undergarments, meant to absorb the sweat from the sailor's feet and legs. Thankfully, we are not left in the dark as to what sailors' stockings might have looked like. Several original pairs exist from the period. For instance, this pair from the early 1780s, found on the wreck of the General Carleton of Whitby. They go up and above the knee, and depending on the legwear of the sailor, might have been fastened with garters or the knee band of the breeches. Arguably, one of the most important and also iconic types of garments for sailors in this period was their legwear. A sailor in port might stand out for his wearing of trousers, or potentially for his wearing of petticoat trousers, also sometimes called petticoat breeches or slops. The trousers of a sailor were similar to those of his land-dwelling counterparts. The general fit of these seems to have favored them being slightly higher than the ankle, oftentimes with pockets. These pockets could be integrated into the garment as you might see on period breeches, or if they were intended to possibly be worn over a pair of breeches, they might potentially have openings on the side to access the pockets of the breeches themselves. We see these side openings in this 1774 watercolor from Lieutenant Gabriel Bray, depicting a sailmaker and his mate. The fabric that these trousers could have been made of is interesting as well. While during the 1760s and into the 1770s, we see them mostly being made of a natural or a white linen. By the latter part of the 1770s, a colorful trend emerged in the form of striped trousers. Trousers aside though, the next most popular piece of legwear would have been the petticoat trousers. These wide, open-legged pieces of legwear seem to have been often misconstrued by those recreating sailor fashion of this period as the equivalent of modern-day shorts. However, through examination of period sources, we can see that this is not the case. Once again, Watson and the Shark comes in handy, showing us the figure in the forefront. Whilst he is wearing petticoat trousers, the fact that he is wearing ordinary cloth breeches underneath this garment shows that these would have been worn as a protective outer layer. The grimy and tar-filled environment of shipboard life and not to mention the constant wind and sea spray seem to have necessitated such a garment. Much like trousers, the majority of these petticoat trousers seem to have also been made from natural or white linen, though again, a handful of depictions also show us striped petticoat trousers. For instance, this 1781 depiction of the death of Captain James Cook. The outerwear of sailors in this period was certainly diverse. It was often considered inappropriate for one to simply be in their shirt sleeves during the 18th century, and sailors were no exception. As such, a variety of outer garments existed and added to the sailor's unique appearance. The most common of these outer garments was aptly named a sailor's jacket. While the name itself is hardly descriptive, we are blessed with a multitude of sources regarding almost every detail of these garments. The source we'll first bring forth is an original jacket. Once again from the wreck of the General Carleton of Whitby, this jacket, made from reddish-brown wool, is an excellent example of a sailor's jacket. Double-breasted, it could be buttoned over during the cold and often icy storms of the Atlantic Ocean, or left open for days of blazing sun. The cuffs of this jacket are in the fitting mariner's variety, though other varieties existed as well, namely the slash cuff, as which we can see in this 1779 print. The color of these jackets varied significantly. While blue was the most common, both on sailors in the Navy and oftentimes those in mercantile service as well, it was by no means a rule. For instance, in this 1769 drawing of a view of the Endeavour's watering place in the Bay of Good Success, we can see Captain Cook's sailors not only in blue, but also drab and even green. In addition to drab and green, we can see this example here, another original jacket from Prince of Fort Wales in Canada, of a red sailor's jacket. These jackets, along with trousers and shirts, would not have been made by tailors. Rather, owing to a ship's limited time in port and the practicality of pre-made clothing, slop shops became popular sources for these clothes. A 1747 publication entitled The London Tradesman had this to say on the matter. The slop shop sells all kinds of shirts, jackets, trousers, and other wearing apparel belonging to sailors, ready-made. It is a business of great profit, but requires no great skill to become master of it. What the London Tradesman leaves out is that many of these garments were in fact not made by slop clothiers either. Rather, they might be imported or potentially outsourced to those handy with a needle and thread. These slop clothes were then either purchased by the sailors themselves or purchased en masse by a ship's purser, fit for issuance to the ship's crew. The sailor's waistcoat is a subject of not much note. Some sailors even preferred to go without them, as seen in period artwork. However, when they did choose to wear them, red was a popular color. These too were often double-breasted, and to match the sailor's waist-length coat, usually lacked the skirts found on land. Topping off our examination of sailors' clothing in this period is, well, hats. Hats and other sorts of headwear were considered a social norm to wear, and much like other items on this list, sailors were not exceptions to this rule. The most common type of hat for sailors in this period was a rather simple one, though earlier fashions of the 1750s favored cocked hats, closer to those worn on land. By the 1770s, a far more practical style of hat came about. These round hats, as they were often called, were simply black felt hats cut round anywhere from 3.5 to 1.5 inches along the brim and stiffened. The brim could either be left flat or turned up slightly, akin to a sort of dish. Ribbons sometimes ornamented the crown of the hat and came in a multitude of colors, with red and blue being the most common. Another common type of headwear at sea was a sort of knit cap. These came in a variety of styles, but the general premise was the same. Much like a modern naval watch cap, or a beanie, or a toque, they proved incredibly practical, not only keeping the head covered, but also warm in the cold Atlantic. So-called Monmouth or Dutch caps made up the majority of these designs. Being a simple tube, they came in a variety of colors. The Monmouth caps tended to remain relatively plain, whilst Dutch caps, so aptly named after the Dutch sailors for whom the design originated, favored more intricate designs, consisting of multicolored stripes along the entirety of the cap. Now that we've examined the majority of a sailor's wardrobe in this period, I hope that you can utilize the information in this video not only as a basis of knowledge, but to even potentially recreate the attire of mariners in this period. If you are interested in reading or learning further, I can wholeheartedly recommend the several blogs, articles, and material culture resources that I will provide in the description below. As always, if you got any questions, concerns, comments, or anything you'd like to share, feel free to leave it in the comments section below. As always, I am Flintlock and Tomahawk Productions, signing out.